In each of these stories, death did not come suddenly. It was there a few seconds before the tragedy, in the form of a sign, a warning, an instruction that someone chose to ignore. 6 ordinary people made a step, a gesture, or a decision that seemed trivial but turned out to be fatal. These are 6 cases where recklessness and overconfidence proved fatal. It was July 9th, 2018. A hot morning over Reno, Nevada was just beginning to heat up when 34-year-old network systems engineer Dan Malvers entered the Highgate Plaza Business Center. The building, built in the early 2000s, had an excessive number of service areas where time and the dry desert climate had taken their toll. One of these areas, the technical area on the 11th floor, had long been labeled unsafe for staff. Worn boards, rickety railings, an old ventilation shaft that had been eroding for years. A large sign hung on the metal door, "Do not enter, unstable surface." Dan knew about it. He passed the door every day on his way upstairs to his office. But on this day, he was going with an intention that seemed insignificant to him: to take a photo for his small blog about urban landscapes. It always seemed to him that from the top technical platforms, you can see the real city, without processing, without tourist angles, without perfect shots, only concrete, heat, and desert draft. At 10:14, he approached the forbidden door, looked back at the corridor, and lightly pressed the handle. There was no lock. The management had planned to repair it long ago, but the work had never started. The door opened softly, releasing a wave of hot air mixed with the smell of old wood. The site was small, a narrow perimeter around the air handling unit, and a few boards laid down during construction. Dan stepped on the first one, which creaked but held his weight. He took out his phone, tilted his head, and took a few test shots. The sun was hanging over the city, creating sharp shadows between the buildings. The picture looked good, and Dan, satisfied, took a step further, to where the boardwalk was darker, dried out, and cracked. Later investigation revealed that the board Dan had put his other foot on had internal rotting from the constant temperature changes. It was held together by only 2 rusted nails. During the examination, the specialists determined that anyone heavier than 45 kilograms would have fallen through instantly. At 10:16, Dan took his last step. The crack was short and sharp, but loud enough to be heard by workers on the next floor. The flooring below him split into 2 pieces, and before he could grab hold or scream, Dan fell more than 12 meters. His body hit the concrete part of the service yard behind the building. Several employees who had gone out for a smoke break were the first to run up. The paramedics who arrived 6 minutes later only pronounced him dead. His injuries were incompatible with life. Surveillance cameras captured the moment when Dan went to the prohibited area. The sign on the door was clearly visible in the frame. Investigators found that there were no external factors. The site was out of service, the door was marked with 2 separate warnings, and the building's internal instructions prohibited access to this sector without a uniform. The office staff remembered Dan as a quiet, level-headed person who never took unnecessary risks. Some of his colleagues said that lately he had been looking for unusual angles for his blog, trying to take photos from inconspicuous points in the city. The medical examiner's report states in a separate line, "Immortal curiosity, multiplied by ignoring direct warnings, became a decisive factor in the tragedy." It was February 3rd, 2020. A small suburb of Toledo, covered with nightly snow, greeted the dawn with the slow noise of distant cars. Many homes still had no power, as the previous night's storm had downed power lines. Gerald Pearson, 56, woke up to a frozen house. The heaters were not working, the kettle was cold, and the temperature inside had dropped to almost freezing. He had long ago purchased a portable gasoline generator, just in case, but had never used it. The generator was in his garage, a small, single-door garage with an oak door that closed tightly against the wind. A large yellow sticker was pasted on the body of the device. Use only outdoors. Risk of deadly carbon monoxide poisoning. Gerald had seen it when he took the generator out of the box, but thought the warning was unnecessary. It's a tool, not a chemical reactor, as he once told a neighbor. At 7:26 a.m., he rolled the generator closer to the middle of the garage, opened the door about 20 centimeters, just enough to bring the extension cord into the house, and pulled the starter cord. The engine rumbled to life at low revs, releasing rhythmic exhaust puffs that quickly rose upward, accumulating near the ceiling. 5 minutes later, a thin stream of frosty air began to seep out from under the gate. Gerald slowly walked into the house, satisfied that he had regained minimal comfort. A refrigerator, an electric kettle, 2 lamps. He turned on the electric stove and put the tea on to heat, sat down in a chair, and opened the news on his phone. He left the door to the garage ajar to hear the generator, as he explained to his friends later in his plans for that morning. He didn't know that this would make the carbon monoxide penetrate the house even faster. Experts estimate that 12 minutes after the startup, the CO level in the garage exceeded the lethal concentration. The garage, which was completely covered with plywood and equipped with old insulation, had almost no ventilation. The 20-centimeter-high exterior opening did not give the exhaust a chance to dissipate. It accumulated layer by layer. At 7:41 a.m., Gerald felt lightheaded. He got up from his chair, thinking he had just stood up abruptly. Then came a dull headache, a typical first symptom of poisoning. His vision became blurry, and his coordination began to lose. But he didn't attribute it to the generator. He decided that he just hadn't eaten for a long time and turned the kettle up to maximum. At this point, the level of carbon monoxide in his blood was already dangerous. When he re-entered the garage to check the engine noise, the concentration of gas inside was so high that he began to lose consciousness almost instantly. Gerald took just 2 steps inside, leaned his arm against the wall, and knelt down. Then he went to his side. The engine continued to run. His neighbors, the Clark family, noticed a constant low rumble coming through the wall. Usually Gerald was an early riser and left the house quite actively, but this morning the yard remained undisturbed. Around 10:20, Mrs. Clark walked over to the shared fence and knocked on his garage door. There was no answer. An hour later, they called the police. When a patrol officer opened the gate fully, a cloud of exhaust gases escaped. Gerald was found near the generator, in the position of a man who had simply lost his balance. The cardiology team confirmed his death on the spot. He had an extremely high level of carboxyhemoglobin in his blood, the result of several minutes of critical poisoning. The rescuers' report was brief. The warnings were clear, the conditions were fatal. The man did not believe in the danger. It was April 11th, 2017. Leeds was waking up to rain that had been pouring down for almost the entire night. In a quiet neighborhood of identical brick houses, 41-year-old Michael Jarvis was walking down the stairs to his basement. He was one of those people who believed in DIY repairs. No masters, do it yourself. In his house, this was a rule, not a savings. Since childhood, he loved to take things apart, fix them, and look for the source of a noise or leak. But this time, he didn't know that a small noise in the pipe would turn into a trap. For the past few days, a strange humming noise had been coming from the basement, as if from high pressure in the water supply. The previous owner's house had kept an instruction manual. It had a red label on it. Do not unscrew, high pressure line, work only with a licensed plumber. Michael had seen this sticker more than once, but he interpreted it as a formality, a mechanical warning that was stuck on everyone. He decided to look into it himself. The basement was cramped, with a low ceiling. Along the right wall was a main pipe with an old cast iron valve that looked sturdy, but had long since rusted from moisture. Next to it was a tool table with a flashlight, an adjustable wrench, and a small plastic container of seals. It was raining outside, and the pipes were trembling slightly. The water supply had been attacked, and the pressure in the network had increased. At 6:42 p.m., Michael moved the flashlight closer to the valve. It was soaked with condensation. The warning sticker was hanging right in front of his eyes. He touched it with his finger, easily tearing off the bottom corner. "Nonsense," he muttered, and picked up the key. The first turn was difficult. The metal grated and the threads cracked. Michael applied more force, and the valve turned sharply. At the same moment, the connection exploded with a thin, almost transparent jet line of water, which in a second turned into a powerful, uncontrollable stream. It struck the man in the chest and knocked him backwards, throwing him to the floor. The lantern fell and rolled to the back corner of the room. The light flickered. In 2 minutes, the water level reached his ankles. In 5, it reached his knees. The flow was not weakening. On the contrary, the pressure was increasing with every second, and the water was pouring in faster and faster. Michael tried to get up, but a strong jet that continued to flow directly from the broken main pinned him to the metal frame of the rack. Boxes of tools began to fall to the floor, making it difficult to move. At 18:49, Michael tried to crawl to the stairs, but the shelving unit, loosened by the water pressure, swayed and fell sideways on him, pinning his left shoulder and blocking his way out. The water level was already up to his chest. His breathing was ragged from the cold and the impact of the jet, and his arms were weakening. He tried to lift the rack, but it slipped in his hands, which were constantly being washed away by the water. At this time, upstairs, Mrs. Fletcher's neighbor was returning from the store. She heard a muffled rumble and a waterfall-like sound coming from the side of Michael's house. At first, she thought it was the gutters, but she felt uneasy. She went closer to the basement window and could see the flicker of a lantern bouncing on the surface of the water through the glass. At 18:56, she called the rescue service. By the time the firefighters arrived, the water level in the basement had exceeded 1.5 meters. The rescuers broke down the door and stopped the water supply, but time was lost. Michael was found pinned under a shelving unit that had fallen under the pressure of the flow. The investigators' report later stated, the warning label was apparently ignored. The valve was critically worn, making it deadly to intervene. For the neighbors, it was a cold reminder that sometimes just one gesture, one turn of a key, can start a chain of events that is unstoppable. It was June 28, 2019. Florida was in the midday heat, and the air above Tampa was shivering with moisture hanging between buildings. On the outskirts of the city, in a suburb with identical small 2-story houses, 52-year-old Frank Dillard was out in his backyard with a steel toolbox. His air conditioner hadn't been working well for a week. The cool air was barely noticeable, and the outdoor unit was humming unevenly. Frank didn't like to call a repairman. He thought it was a waste of time and money, so he decided to fix it himself. On the side panel of the outdoor unit, next to the mounting screws, he could see a large black inscription. Warning: turn off power before servicing. Risk of fatal electric shock. The metal had faded a bit in the sun, but the warning was clear. In that neighborhood, such incidents were not uncommon. Air conditioners in Florida's humid climate wear out quickly, exposing electrical contacts. At 2:17 p.m., Frank set the box on the concrete slabs and wiped the sweat from his face with his sleeve. He remembered that he could have turned off the power at the panel, but thought it would take a minute tops. Even when he opened the technical panel, where he could see the wires of different power supplies inside, and when he smelled the ozone from overheated contacts, he did not stop. The phone in his pocket had several missed messages from his daughter. She was reminding her father to finally call the repairman. But Frank didn't hear her. He was preoccupied with the idea that he could fix it himself. When he unscrewed the top cover of the unit, it tilted to the side, revealing an internal panel with power capacitors and cables. The moisture-laden air created microscopic droplets on the case. In some places, the insulation appeared to have darkened, a finding later confirmed by experts who described the condition of the wiring as critical. At 2:20 p.m., Frank ran his hand around the edge of the unit, looking for where the dust had gotten trapped. At that moment, he inadvertently touched the bare end of the power cable that powered the compressor. The voltage was high, over 240 volts. The impact was instantaneous. The muscles in his arm contracted in a spasm, and Frank was pulled forward, closer to the open electrical panel. His legs buckled, but his body remained in a semi-compressed state for several seconds, drawn by the current. A witness from a neighboring yard, 68-year-old Mr. Allen, heard a short, sharp scream and the impact of something heavy hitting the concrete. When he got closer, Frank was already lying on the ground, his body partially resting on a toolbox. The outdoor air conditioner unit continued to run, emitting a monotonous humming sound. The humid air only intensified the bitter smell of overheated contacts. At 14:27, Mr. Allen called 911. The first rescuers arrived 6 minutes later. They tried to resuscitate Frank, but the ventricular fibrillation caused by the electric shock was beyond repair. Specialists quickly identified the cause: direct contact with a live part during live work. The final report of the electrical examination stated, "The warning on the case was clearly visible. Turning off the power could have completely prevented the incident." For Frank's family, the incident was a painful reminder. No minor breakdown is worth the risk when reliable instructions explicitly say to stop. It was August 2nd, 2021. The morning air in Yellowstone National Park was warm, but there was a light fog over the geothermal valley as steam from the hot springs rose up in thin white lines. Tourists walked along wooden planks that ran over unstable ground. Steam pockets, hyperheated pools, and thin layers of siliceous deposits made the area extremely dangerous. The same signs hung along the paths every few meters: "Do not climb," "Dangerous area," "Thin soil." Among the visitors was 29-year-old Linda Rowell, a tourist from Rochester traveling alone. Linda was an active user of social media. Her pages were filled with colorful photos from her travels, each trying to catch the eye. She was distinguished by her tendency to get a little closer than other tourists. This, according to her friends, created unique shots for her. At 9:13, she approached the pool with turquoise water bubbling up from the depths. The deck was crowded with people, but everyone stopped at a safe distance. Linda leaned against the railing and looked down at her feet. The ground behind the fence seemed hard, covered with a thin crust like dried clay. None of the tourists nearby doubted it. It was just a visible layer hiding the boiling water underneath. Linda took out her phone and cautiously walked around the group of people. One man, noticing her intention, said, "Miss, you can't go in there. It's not safe." She smiled back as if she had heard it hundreds of times before. "I'll just be a second," she replied quietly, not trying to convince anyone. She walked over to the fence, looked around, and then threw her foot over the railing. Her sneaker touched the light surface of the ground, which gave a slight spring, but did not fall immediately. Linda took a cautious step half a meter closer to the lake. Another one, and stopped. The right angle had been found. She picked up her phone and turned on the front camera. At 9:14:32, she heard a soft, dry, crunching sound underneath her. Witnesses later said that the sound was like the cracking of thin ice breaking under weight. Linda only had time to turn her head to the side when the ground beneath her feet suddenly settled. The layer of silicon crust, no more than a few centimeters thick, broke, and Linda fell into the hot thermal hole. The scream was short. The spring was so hot that the water temperature exceeded 90 degrees C. Her body sank almost immediately as the fall swallowed up everything around her. A second later, a cloud of steam rose into the air. An eyewitness, a young couple from Minnesota, saw her hand with the phone disappear into the boiling water. The man rushed to the fence, but the distance and unstable ground made any rescue attempt impossible. The park staff, who arrived 2 minutes later, immediately realized that rescue efforts were no longer possible. The thermal pools in this area were up to several meters deep, and the temperature left no chance of survival. It took 3 hours to survey the site. Due to the chemical composition and extreme temperature, The water completely destroyed organic tissue. What was found was too little to restore the exact mechanism of the fall. The National Park Service report stated, "The tragedy was a direct result of the disregard for numerous warnings and protective barriers." This was not the first case for the park staff, but it was one of the most illustrative. Just one step over the line, and the difference between a nice shot and a deadly trap disappeared forever. It was October 19th, 2016. It was a cool autumn evening in the small town of Springdale, Arkansas. The roads glistened under the light of streetlights after a light rain. Thomas Brady, 38, was on his way home from work at a local auto repair shop. He was driving an old Chevy Silverado pickup truck that he knew down to the last bolt. Thomas was fond of saying that a seatbelt is for beginners, not for people who grew up driving. His friends were used to these words, but each of them had once told him that one day this habit could kill him. In the evening, traffic was slow. The rain had stopped, but the asphalt remained slippery. The radio was playing country music softly. Thomas was driving down Highway 412, which led to the suburb where his house was. He was in no hurry, keeping a steady 45 miles per hour. Everything looked ordinary, a typical trip he had made hundreds of times. At 7:34 p.m., at the intersection ahead, one car braked sharply, trying to turn left into oncoming traffic. Thomas braked in response, but the pickup skipped an extra few meters on the wet pavement. Its speed was still low. The impact would have been low, bending the bumper and causing a few insurance inconveniences. All that was needed was a seatbelt to keep the driver in place. But Thomas was not wearing a seatbelt. At the moment of the collision, his body moved forward by inertia. The airbag deployed, but it only protects you if you are wearing a seatbelt. Without it, it becomes an additional impact. Thomas's chest hit the top of the steering wheel. In a split second, his body flew higher, and he hit the windshield. The glass instantly cracked with cobwebs and then flew out with his body. Witnesses who were driving behind said that Thomas was thrown to the wet asphalt 2 meters in front of the pickup truck. He was lying motionless, his clothes cut by shards of glass. 2 drivers ran over first. One turned him on his side, but he was no longer breathing. His head had received a critical blow during the fall. Rescuers arrived at 1941. Doctors tried to restore cardiac activity for several minutes, but the head injury proved fatal. The couple who witnessed the accident said almost the same thing. The impact was weak. If he had been wearing his seatbelt, he would have gotten out of the car on his own. The traffic police report stated, "The speed was low, the impact was moderate. The fundamental cause of death was not wearing a seatbelt." The next day, at the car repair shop where Thomas worked, his co-workers gathered around his workbox. On the wall was a poster with his favorite saying, "I know the roads better than a belt." One of the mechanics said quietly, he knew cars, but he did not believe in a simple thing that could have saved his life. This tragedy was yet another example of how small habits, the stubborn "I don't need it," can turn into the ultimate mistake. In each of these stories, death was not something random or inevitable. It occurred where it seemed safest, in a garage, in a basement, at a work site, on the road, or among tourist routes. 6 people took familiar small steps, choosing convenience over caution, confidence over healthy doubt, and it was this small thing that became the beginning of the irreversible. Warnings do not exist to limit. They are designed to stop where human overconfidence tends to go further. In these 6 cases, the warnings were prominent and clear, but they were also the easiest to ignore. And perhaps the main takeaway is that tragedies rarely come suddenly. They often start with a single decision, a decision that seems inconsequential until it becomes the last one.